while this is going on, I am going to go ahead and again thank you all for joining us. And we are live on Facebook now, so that is all working well. So thank you again for all of you that have joined us this evening. We are grateful to have you for our event tonight, which is titled Life and Death on Texas's Antebellum Frontier, from the Red River to El Paso. I am Anjali Zutshi. I am the Executive Director of the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission. My colleague, Christy Peloquin, who runs this program, could not be here today, so I'm standing in for her. I'm sure many of you are familiar with her, and if you attend these events regularly. We are really glad that you've stopped by, and we encourage you all to get to know us a little bit more. The Friends of the THC is the nonprofit partner to the Texas Historical Commission. We provide historic support for historic preservation efforts across the state, and you can get involved by checking out our What We Do page on our website at thcfriends.org. I also want to thank those of you that have chosen to support us with donations through these events. We really, really appreciate it and are truly grateful. So thank you so much. If you've made a donation for this event or past events, we appreciate that very much. We possibly have a few commissioners that have joined us, some board members. Welcome to you all as well. We appreciate you having you here with us, along with our THC colleagues that join us regularly for these events. If you haven't already followed us on social media, please do so on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. We're very active on these platforms, and we'd love to connect with you. This is also one way you can find out about future events and other programming that we have on a regular basis. Like our event, our next virtual event on October 17th, which is titled, We've Been Working on the Railroad. Our presenter for this event is Slayton Harvey House Executive Board Member and BNSF Railways conductor, Mandy Lockaby. So this should be a really fun event as well. We hope you'll be able to join us. Registration for this event is open. It is on our website. If you go to our website at thcfriends.org and scroll down to the events section, you can register for this event there as well. A few housekeeping items before I introduce our speaker today. We would appreciate it if you can keep your microphones on mute. If you have a question, we will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. While the presentation is going on, you're welcome to drop your questions in the chat box. And I will be monitoring the chat box, and we'll go back to the top of all of the comments to make sure I can share all those comments and questions with our presenter. And we'll take as many questions as we possibly have time for, or as our presenter will have time for. And then tomorrow, everyone that is registered for this event will receive an email with a link to the recording for this event, so you can share it with friends. You can watch it if you were not able to watch the whole event. You can watch it in full again. And then if there are any list of resources that are shared today during our presentation, book recommendations, etc., those will be part of the email as well. That email will come to you from Christy Peloquin, so please look for that. With that, it is now my privilege to introduce our presenter for this evening. Dr. Glen Sample Ely is the award-winning author of The Texas Frontier and the Butterfield Overland Mail, 1858 to 1861. This is a University of Oklahoma Press publication from 2016. He is also the author of Where the West Begins, Debating Texas Identity, which is a Texas Tech University Press publication from 2011. This book received 16 honors and awards combined. His third book, Murder in Montague, Frontier Justice and Retribution in Texas, won the Lohman Memorial Book Prize from the Texas State Historical Association. Dr. Ely is co-author of Confederates and Comancheros, Skullduggery and Double Dealing in the Texas-New Mexico Borderlands, which won first place book awards from Westerners International and the Will Rogers Medallion Awards. Dr. Ely earned his PhD from Texas Christian University, TCU. His work has won the Award of Excellence in Preserving History from the Texas Historical Commission, as well as Gold and Silver Wilder Awards from the Texas Association of Museums. In 2018, Dr. Ely was inducted as a fellow in the Texas State Historical Association. So thank you, Dr. Ely, for joining us this evening, sharing your time with us. And with that, it's over to you.
Thanks, Anjali, for having me, and great to be with you all today. So starting on this then, the Butterfield Overland Mail line, which ran from St. Louis and Memphis to San Francisco, operated from September 1858 to April 1861. The Overland Road, which is 2,800 miles in length, passed through Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Now, in January 2023, Congress designated the Butterfield Overland Road as a National Historic Trail administered by the National Park Service. My talk today focuses on the 740-mile Texas section of the route, which I spent a quarter century researching. Now, many of the people living and working on the Texas frontier during this period had connections to the mail line. Some worked as agents, overseers, station managers, stage drivers, conductors, clerks, cooks, and livestock handlers for the company. Others provided cattle, horses, mules, merchandise, corn, flour, and forage to the mail stations. Indeed, one cannot talk about Texas's antebellum frontier without also discussing Butterfield and its significant economic imprint upon the region. The two are inextricably intertwined. Prior to the Civil War, Washington played a far greater role in shaping West Texas than did the state legislature. During this period, the U.S. Army and the U.S. Postmaster General quickly became West Texas's major benefactors. Soldiers and civilians built roads, forts, and subposts, and guarded passenger, mail, and freight traffic. Federal payrolls and contracts provided an enormous boost to the local economy. Many of the region's earliest settlements owe their existence and survival to this federal presence. Leroy Hafen says, the Postal Service became an important political agency, binding the Western pioneer to his government and home in the East. The federal government, through its mail service and military, was a pioneering agency, leading the immigration, encouraging settlement, and making safe the routes of travel. Echoing Hafen, Richard White says that the American West, which includes West Texas, more than any other section of the United States, is a creation not so much of individual or local efforts, but of federal efforts. Indeed, White contends the federal government shaped the West. Studies by a number of scholars show that both the Republic of Texas and the Lone Star State lack sufficient resources to make internal improvements and protect its citizens. For example, without the U.S. Army to deter them, raiding Comanches, Kiowas, and Apaches depopulated much of West Texas's frontier during the Civil War. Throughout this period, Texas Ranger regiments proved uneven and ineffective. Ultimately, it was the federal government and not Texas that facilitated Anglo, Hispanic, and African American settlement in the region. Economically and militarily, the state of Texas was largely absent west of the 100th meridian. The U.S. Army, in conjunction with the Postmaster General's Overland Mail Service, spurred economic development of the region and its infrastructure. Some of the oldest European American buildings in western Texas are overland mail stations and frontier forts. In 1846, the value of all property in Texas was $34 million. In the second half of the 19th century, the U.S. Army spent twice that figure, or more than $70 million in the Lone Star State, much of it in West Texas. Robert Wooster aptly describes the region as a child of federal subsidy. Frontier settlers worried that if Texas seceded, the U.S. Army and the Butterfield Overland Mail would leave. Residents would lose lucrative government contracts and markets for their agricultural products. Payrolls would disappear, severely impacting local stores, hotels, and saloons. In addition, citizens were anxious about losing military protection against depredating Indians. It is no surprise then that Forts Davis, Stockton, Duncan, Inge, Mason, and Martin Scott were all located within Texas counties voting against secession. Before we commence our journey across the Lone Star State, however, some of this transcontinental mail line history is in order. On September 16, 1857, Postmaster General Aaron Brown signed an agreement with John Butterfield of Utica, New York, and his associates of the Overland Mail Company to provide mail service from St. Louis and Memphis to San Francisco. The 6-year contract, at $600,000 per year, stipulated that the service be semi-weekly, twice a week, in 4-horse coaches or spring wagons, and that each trip be made within 25 days. Muriel Wright points out that Congress left the responsibility and the actual selection of the route to President Buchanan's administration. According to the San Francisco Bulletin, John Butterfield was an old friend and chum of President Buchanan. Buchanan's Postmaster General was Aaron Brown, an ardent Southerner from Tennessee. Now, Brown had received numerous bids for the mail contract, but he rejected them all. Instead, he selected his own route, one of a Southern orientation, running through Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Brown argued that the optimal year-round climate of the Southern route would ensure timely and reliable overland service. While aspects of his argument certainly had merit, many in Congress correctly perceived that regional bias had strongly influenced his decision. Northern lawmakers were rightly concerned that a Southern overland mail route would set a precedent for the nation's first transcontinental railroad, and that the tracks of the railroad would follow the ruts of the overland mail line. Postmaster General Brown certainly hoped this would be the case, describing his selection as the pioneer route for the first great railroad that may be constructed to the Pacific. Northerners were not about to let this happen. A California newspaper called the Postmaster General's decision a foul wrong and an outrage, while a Chicago paper blasted it as one of the greatest swindles perpetrated upon the country by the slaveholders. Ultimately, Congress deadlocked on the route of the Pacific Railroad. As Ray Billington and Martin Ridge note, so long as sectionalism plagued the nation, no road could be built. Postmaster General Brown awarded Butterfield and his associates the overland contract for several reasons. Besides his friendship with President Buchanan, John Butterfield had many years of experience operating mail and express services. As Muriel Wright points out, the greatest stager of the time, if not for all time, was John Butterfield. His ability and character and that of his associates were unquestioned at Washington. One of Butterfield's associates in the venture was William G. Fargo of Wells Fargo and Company, founded in 1852. Butterfield, Fargo, along with Henry Wells, were the 3 principal founders of American Express Company in 1850. W. Turntine Jackson says that both Wells and Fargo stood to make a considerable sum from their ancillary express and financial operations in the West that connected to the great transcontinental mail line. It seems quite natural that Wells Fargo and Company, the only one of 4 express companies operating in the Trans-Missouri West, would have the greatest continuing concern for the success of the Overland Mail Company. The Postmaster General's establishment of a transcontinental mail service between St. Louis and San Francisco, along with the U.S. Army outposts in the region, offered the real prospect of making money from the federal government and related agencies on the Texas frontier. Many among the first waves of settlers moving westward after 1848 sensed a golden opportunity to capitalize on Washington's increased presence in the region. Some of these frontier entrepreneurs got rich, some went broke, and others lost their lives. Overland mail stations and military forts required regular supplies and services. Butterfield stage stops and frontier outposts needed corn and hay for livestock, as well as beef and produce for soldiers and employees. They depended on merchants to serve their local communities and freighters to haul supplies. They also needed civilian personnel to perform specific services. In many cases, the mail company hired the same forage, livestock, and freighting contractors that supplied military outposts in West Texas. Some frontier residents, in an effort to maximize their income, worked several jobs at once. Noted Butterfield stage driver Henry Skillman also supplied beef to Fort Bliss in El Paso County. George Lyles, manager of Smith's Ranch Butterfield Station, held the hay contracts for Fort Bliss and Fort Quitman, also in El Paso County. When not helping manage Butterfield's Clear Fork Station in Throckmorton County, J.G. Irwin worked as a beef contractor for nearby Camp Cooper. Adam Rankin Johnson managed a string of Overland Mail Company stations from the Middle Concho to the Pecos, while working simultaneously as a Texas Ranger, state surveyor, and water freighter. During the antebellum period, Texas's primitive transportation network hampered its economic development. The state boasted few well-developed thoroughfares that permitted the timely movement of goods to market. During the 1850s, the U.S. Army and Butterfield built and maintained much of West Texas's road system, which was used by countless soldiers, immigrants, freighters, and stagecoaches. The Overland Mail Road was the 19th century equivalent of the modern interstate highway system, stimulating greater passenger traffic, commercial freighting, and economic development on the western frontier. Regional use of these antebellum transportation networks continued long after the Civil War into the 20th century, demonstrating the enduring historical significance of Butterfield and the Army in Texas. In June 1858, Butterfield Representative Abel Rathbone Corbin wrote to U.S. Secretary of War John Floyd on behalf of the Overland Mail Company, informing Floyd of the route through Texas. Corbin profusely thanked Secretary Floyd for his kind expressions in regard to the Army furnishing through protection to the Overland Mail from St. Louis and Memphis to San Francisco. Secretary Floyd, however, had no intention of providing a personal armed escort for the Overland Mail Company. Floyd wrote to Corbin, "You will perceive the impracticability of complying with your request. Instructions, however, will be given to the commanders of the departments of Texas and New Mexico to afford such protection to the stages as the military service of their commands will permit. Considering the commanders' slender resources and the small garrisons at their disposal, the U.S. Army could render only slight assistance." One can read between the lines of Floyd's letter to see that Butterfield was on its own. Along various sections of the Lone Star frontier, the U.S. Army was almost invisible, leaving isolated Overland Mail employees to defend their stage stops against raiding Comanches and Apaches. As a defensive deterrent, Butterfield constructed stout rock stations that resembled mini fortresses. The mail company staffed these stations with its own private army, typically 4 to 5 persons per station, each armed with a Sharps rifle and Colt Navy revolver. Most of the stagecoaches used by the Overland Mail Company in West Texas were not the heavy wooden Concord wagons seen in such popular Western movies as Stagecoach. Along the arid frontier, it was too taxing on livestock to pull a cumbersome Concord through deep sand roads in dry weather or through boggy stretches after heavy rains and flooding. In Texas, the typical passenger vehicle was the lighter canvas-top Celerity wagon, also known as a mud wagon. On average, these Celerity wagons cost $700 each. Much of the time, four-mule teams were hitched to Butterfield's mud wagons, although horses were used on some sections of the route. Now, the mules varied in cost. The lead mules at the front of the team ran $35 to $40 each, where the higher grade mules, known as wheelers, costing $70 to $80 each, were used at the back of the team closer to the coach. The Overland Mail Company kept 10 to 20 mules on hand at each station. Butterfield's larger regional depots kept 50 to 60 mules and horses in reserve for needed adjustments along the line. Now, travel on a Celerity wagon during this time was far from luxurious. Customers grumbled about the chronic overcrowding of the coaches, citing instances where the mail company tried to cram 6 or 7 people into a space designed to accommodate only 4. One traveler lamented, ordinary-sized men have not the slightest chance of being at ease on their seats. Other passengers groused about the coach's interminably slow rate of travel across Texas, typically 3 to 5 miles per hour. The special overland correspondent for the San Francisco Daily Evening Bulletin denounced the company's practice of using miserable little worn-out mules on the Texas portion of the route. When not dealing with complaints about the mules and the coach's quarters, employees had to contend with volatile customers. In 1859, a Butterfield coach carrying Dr. J.C. Tucker pulled up to Diamond Station at Whitesboro, Texas at sunset, and the passengers disembarked for dinner. Trouble had been brewing in Tucker's stagecoach for some hours before the meal stop in North Texas. During the trip through Arkansas, several of the passengers had gotten into a nasty argument and exchanged insults. One of these, Dutchy, a rotund German, had refused to refrain from smoking his pipe in the tightly enclosed space. A fellow traveler named Texas, who hailed from the Lone Star State, grabbed Dutchy's pipe from his mouth and tossed it out the coach window. Now the German's loud snoring also proved intolerable. Texas said, "We'll have to get shut of this porker," and he proceeded to unlatch the carriage door. The next jolt the stage made, the door gave way, and out went Dutchy, heels over head, into the road. Now, Texas had issues not only with Dutchy, but also with a young Frenchman in the coach who didn't appreciate Texas's attention to his attractive female companion. Shortly after crossing the Red River into Texas, the Frenchman admonished Texas, "Damn you, don't you address this lady." Texas replied, "Well, Frenchy, you do speak English well enough to apologize at the next station." A half hour later, the overland coach pulled up to Diamonds, and after dismounting, Texas and Frenchy decided to settle their differences with a duel in the station's corral. After promising Dr. Tucker that he would fix the frog eater, Texas entered the corral and faced his opponents before a crowd of half a dozen Butterfield employees. In the exchange of shots that followed, Texas killed Frenchy. By that time, the stage driver had finished his dinner and fresh livestock were in harness. Tucker and Texas could only seize some food and jump into the coach as the wild Mustang started off at a fierce gallop. There was no discussion about presenting the matter to local authorities. Tucker and Texas rode on together until New Mexico, when Texas got off at Deming. Such were the rough and tumble aspects of overland travel during the antebellum period. In 1860, another incident involving a Butterfield traveler nicknamed Texas occurred in western Texas east of Fort Davis. Texas's fellow passengers on board the coach were a feisty crew. Stiff from sitting in the same position from hours on end, they decided to try some new seating arrangements. To create more legroom, those sitting in the front of the celerity wagon pushed the mailbags to the back. Texas, sitting in the back of the vehicle, took offense at sharing his cramped space with the mailbags. Ignoring Texas's complaints, one of those up front continued moving sacks to the rear and, pointing to his pistols, said there would be a problem unless his arrangement was agreed with. This threat incensed Texas, who immediately grabbed his own pistol and declared, "Well, if you talk about trouble, I can too, and as to that matter, I'd gladly have trouble as anything else." Texas's declaration and its accompanying gestures immediately made the first complainant draw in and exercise his prudence as the better part of valor. Both of these stories ably illustrate the ethos of the enduring Lone Star State motto, "Don't mess with Texas." Turning now to everyday life at Butterfield stage stops, the Overland Mail Company built most of these stations during the summer of 1858. Within a year, it had erected more than 50 in Texas alone. Typically, Butterfield placed the stations near water sources, but far enough away to allow Native Americans access. Workers constructed the stage stops out of wood, adobe, rock, or a combination thereof. Building a station took about 15 days with a three-man crew who earned 75 cents to $1 a day. The more elaborate rock structures cost about $1,500 in labor and materials, while adobe and lumber buildings ran about $150 to $200 each. Freighters hauled finished wood for the doors, roofs, window frames, and floors to West Texas from San Antone. Each stage stop usually had 2 to 3 rooms measuring 15 by 15 feet with an attached corral. Corrals were 7 to 8 feet high, built of adobe and/or wood, although some featured stacked rock walls. Some of the larger stations featured floor plans that were more elaborate and spacious. Stage conductor Parker Burnham recalled that several were 16 by 30 feet on one side and 16 by 30 feet on the other side, with a gateway leading between the two to the station entrance. At the back was a 16-foot square courtyard. In these larger buildings, some of the rooms might have finished flooring. Leon Hole's Station, situated in Pecos County, 9 miles west of Fort Stockton, featured 5 rooms, including a dining room, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a storeroom. The storeroom contained grain, commissary supplies, tools, and ammunition. Many of the stage stops also included portholes in the walls for employees to shoot at attacking Indians. As El Paso County District Judge Josiah Crosby said, none of the structures were Fifth Avenue hotels. They were rude buildings improvised from the materials at hand. Crosby never recalled seeing shingled roofs on the buildings or glass in their windows. Employees constructed furniture for the station on site. Workers made tables out of unfinished pine boards and chairs, more often benches, from split logs. Beds were rough-hewn and simple in design. Stocking the Overland Mail stations created a sizable demand for frontier goods, which was welcome news for regional merchants. The following list illustrates the average cost for station supplies in West Texas. Flour was $8 a barrel, bacon 25 to 30 cents a pound, coffee 40 cents a pound, tea 50 to 60 cents a pound, sugar 20 to 25 cents a pound, salt 30 to 35 cents a pound, and dried fruits 25 to 30 cents a pound. Station employees seldom ate canned meats. Butterfield preferred to keep fresh beeves and hogs at its stage stops. The Overland Mail Company kept a large supply of corn and hay on hand for the livestock, as the local terrain was usually too sparse to support a station's requirements year-round. Local grasses were most prevalent from spring to early fall during the so-called rainy season. Leaving the stage stop to go out and cut hay was often a deadly task. Raiding Comanches and Apaches targeted employees out on forage detail. Parker Burnham recalled, "At times you couldn't put value on hay, for it was impossible to get a man to go out and cut it. They wouldn't cut it for $50 an hour." Burnham remembered 3 instances of men being killed by the Indians while cutting hay. As a result, the mail companies increasingly resorted to hiring contractors to freight in the necessary forage by wagon train. To avoid any possible shortfalls, the mail contractors laid in an 8 to 9 month supply, 10 to 12 tons of hay at $20 per ton, and 300 to 400 bushels of corn at $3 per bushel. Now, the Overland Mail Company operated on average 44 stations in Texas during its contract, 40 stations in the from 1858 to 1859, and 46 stations from 1859 to 1861. There were 4 employees per station, more in the towns, or approximately 176 employees in Texas. In 1860, skilled workers such as blacksmiths, carpenters, and stonemasons earned $1.70 per day, whereas common laborers made $1 per day. Since most overland workers were laborers, a good average for all workers might be $1.25 per day or $456 per year, for a total annual Texas payroll of $80,256, or roughly $3 million in today's money. With our introduction now in place, let's go out in the field and visit several historic sites on Texas's antebellum frontier. Our first stop today will be on the Middle Concho River, west of present-day San Angelo, Texas. At the headwaters of the Middle Concho, coaches stopped at Butterfield's Head of Concho Station. Situated at 2,400 feet in elevation, Head of Concho was the last permanent water on the route for 80 miles until Horsehead Crossing on the Pecos River. Prior to the Civil War, Head of Concho served as a regional operations hub and supply base for the Overland Mail Company. Butterfield built a substantial rock fortress here near a deep water hole that provided an ample supply of water for both employees and livestock. Describing the setting, one traveler noted the low arid hills surrounding the stage stop. The land, destitute of all timber, was perfectly dry and dusty. Head of Concho also served as a beef depot. The steady demand for cattle on the Texas frontier encouraged local ranchers and overland employees to raise livestock to sell to the mail company and the military. A San Francisco reporter riding eastward in late 1858 observed that the station keeper at Head of Concho had 100 head of cows grazing in the vicinity. Let him look out and be wide awake, or the Comanches will have them before spring. Indeed, Comanche raiding on the Middle Concho proved so troublesome during this period that it seemed that the Indians and the employees of the mail company were virtually at war. The same correspondent reported that Butterfield was building strong station houses provided with 10 to 20 guns each. Constructed of quarried limestone blocks, Head of Concho Station proved virtually impregnable to Comanche attacks. Overland Mail employees, however, were always vulnerable when going in or out of the stage stop, typically on forage detail or tending to the mules and horses. In December 1858, 16 raiders attacked the station stock handlers 500 yards from the station, making off with 27 animals. Since the men were all on foot, they could not mount any pursuit. In the 6 weeks preceding this raid, Comanches had taken 34 mules and horses from the stage stop's corrals. On June 19, 1860, 25 Comanches trapped head of Concho station manager J.W. Shepard outside the station. Making a final stand with a rifle and a revolver, Shepard downed the lead warrior's horse with a shot from his rifle, and he fired his pistol some 4 times when he was shot down and scalped. The body was entirely stripped of all clothing. After killing Shepard, the Comanches turned their attention to a 12-year-old Mexican boy who was tending to some grazing mules. The young lad made a desperate dash for safety on his pony with the Indians in hot pursuit. A newspaper reported the Mexican, acting upon the principle that a good run was better than a bad stand, made good his escape. The youth quickly realized that his pony, shod with metal horseshoes, moved faster over broken terrain than did his pursuers' unshod mounts. Another report said that the boy saved his life by his coolness and courage, by deliberately seeking out in his flight the rocky ridges, and by circling around the Indians, he finally reached the station house in safety. Although the marauders failed to corner the youth, they still managed to run off 10 mules and 1 horse. The loss of all company livestock caused a 7-hour delay in overland mail service until Butterfield sent replacement mules to the besieged stage stop. Overland Mail employees buried the slain manager, Shepard, next to the station. Shepard, who left behind a wife and 3 children in Kansas, had come to the Texas frontier to make his fortune, but instead lost his life. Only 5 days after this Comanche raid, another tragedy struck head of Concho. Louis Schellenberger, the landowner, had assumed management of the stage stop after Shepard's death. On the morning of June 24, 1860, the new manager shot his wife. Both Schellenberger and his wounded spouse claimed that the shooting was an accident, but some people familiar with the couple suspected otherwise. According to reports, Mrs. Schellenberger had been very cruelly treated and beaten by her husband recently, causing the neighbors to form the impression of his guilt in the act of shooting. The wife was in an advanced state of pregnancy, a newspaper noted, and her wounds so severe that there was little confidence in her recovery. 9 months after this shooting, in the spring of 1861, the Overland Mail Company abandoned head of Concho Station. Today, the site is one of the better preserved stage stops on the entire Texas route. Our second stop today is at Mountain Pass in Taylor County, southwest of modern Abilene, Texas. Mountain Pass runs through the 2,400-foot Callahan Divide. This divide lies halfway between the Clear Fork and Colorado River watersheds. Today, drivers on Interstate 20 can see the Callahan Divide off in the distance south of Merkel, Texas. Throughout its use as a stage stop, Mountain Pass consistently ranked as one of the deadliest sites on the entire Texas route. Mountain Pass Station sits on a hill overlooking a fine spring. Today, the spring is an enclosed pond ringed by tall rushes. When New York Herald reporter Waterman Ormsby's Butterfield coach stopped at Mountain Pass in September 1858, an elderly African-American woman served him a breakfast of coffee, tough beef, and a butterless shortcake. Commenting on his meal, Ormsby said, "There's an old saying that every man must eat his peck of dirt, and I think I've had good measure with my peck on this trip, which has been roughing it with a vengeance." In marked contrast, Daily Alta California reporter J.M. Farwell enjoyed his visit here. Arriving at 2 a.m. in early November 1858, Farwell savored a good meal of beefsteaks, eggs, coffee, and the like. On 19th century maps and illustrations, this Callahan Divide landmark typically appears as Mountain Pass or Comanche Pass. Travelers called it Comanche Pass for good reason. The Butterfield station at Mountain Pass sat astride a major Comanche trail. A Texas Rangers report to Governor Sam Houston in 1860 noted that depredating Indians frequently passed through the gap. In 1856, a Comanche warrior ambushed an Army Express mail rider near the spring here. The Comanche's intent was murder or robbery, but he soon found that killing people was a game that two could play at, and who lost his own life instead of taking that of another. After this 1856 attack, the valley's watershed acquired the name Comanche Creek. In November 1858, Daily Alta California reporter Farwell called it Comanche Springs. In January 1859, Indian raiders ran off 8 mules just before the Overland Mail arrived at Mountain Pass Station. A few weeks later, a Butterfield employee killed a Comanche near the stage stop an hour before the coach came through. A report of the incident noted 4 Comanches were skulking near the place for the purpose of running off some stock in care of a Mexican herdsman. The latter concealed himself and fired as the Indians approached, shooting one down and then retreated in some haste. In March 1859 at Mountain Pass, Indians killed a black man who was in the company's employment. The increased frequency of deadly attacks at Mountain Pass and other stations in West Texas prompted the Overland Mail Company that same month to issue additional Sharps rifles and ammunition to its employees. Despite the issuance of more arms, however, the Indian raids continued. At 3 in the afternoon on April 12, 1860, 14 Indians, likely Comanches, raided Mountain Pass Station. A newspaper account reported that Shadrach Steyer, James Hamby, and 23-year-old William Lambshead were 200 to 300 yards from the stage stop when the attack commenced. The warriors shot and scalped Steyer and Hamby, and Lambshead, when last seen, was passing over the brow of a hill 20 or 30 yards in advance of his pursuers. His body has not yet been found. Next, the raiders turned their attention to the stage stop, which was defended by one man and shot several arrows into the door. A short time after the Indians departed with 5 Butterfield mules, Steyer appeared at the station entrance, scalped and dripping with gore, presenting a truly horrid spectacle. He lasted another 10 minutes before expiring. The Comanche massacre of these 3 Butterfield employees provides a poignant reminder of the harsh realities confronting opportunistic persons who came to the Western frontier to make their fortune. While some of these folks became wealthy, many more ended up eking out a marginal existence, while others, such as Steyer, Hamby, and Lambshead, lost their lives. Finally, although the Butterfield Overland Mail operated for just 30 months, from September 1858 until April 1861, during the time, the mail line influenced and intersected much of Texas's frontier history. While some of our story today takes place within the Lone Star State, this is quintessentially an American tale. Many of the same economic, cultural, and sectional issues that challenged 19th century Texans confronted citizens across the country. Now, if you'd like more information on the Texas frontier before the Civil War and on the Butterfield Overland Mail route, please see my book, The Texas Frontier and the Butterfield Overland Mail, 1858 to 1861, published by the University of Oklahoma Press. And they've just come out with an updated paperback edition of this book. And you can also get it available online at Amazon. Now, in addition, there are many pictures from the Butterfield Trail in Texas at the Butterfield blog, which is on my website, texashistory.com. Now, let me stop sharing here. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to take those now. I'm at your disposal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ely. Such fascinating stories about life on the frontier. I had I'll just jump in with a question. Your last slide before the book slide showed a historical marker. During your research, especially in the Texas section of the trail, did you see additional markers that kind of tell the story along the way?
Yes, absolutely. And I have pictures of many of those THC markers in my book. Yeah, I think it's great that people can actually stop at the public portions of the route and read these markers. Of course,
Okay.
a lot of this land is on private property. So the state put these markers on public highways or on county roads where people could see them.
Right, right. So we do have a few questions in the chat box, and if y'all would like to just come off mute and ask your question directly, please feel free. But I'll go ahead and get started with the ones that are in the chat box. The first one is from Doug Dukes, who says, or who's asking, was Mountain Pass the same Mountain Pass where 11 infantry and 4th Cavalry personnel from Fort Concho and Fort Phantom Hill were assigned in a rotating assignment? Are those the same locations?
Yeah, after the Civil War, it was used as a mail stop for a new branch of the mail line going up to Fort Smith, Arkansas, run by Ben Ficklin out of Fort Concho. So yes, it was a small outpost where there were troops stationed there. And again, there were more Indian attacks and raids upon that location after the Civil War.
Sheila Goodgame asks, did the ticket price include the meals served at the stations?
Yes. I believe so. Don't hold me to that absolutely. I didn't see anywhere where people were charging money, but it's possible.
Wonderful. Jason Crouch asks, when I was a child in El Paso, I was told there was a stagecoach station at Hueco Tanks. Can you speak to that location?
Yes, absolutely. If you see Waco tanks from the air, imagine the ring of rock formations there. It's at the northeast corner of Waco tanks. And again, in the book, there's a period map which shows specifically where the location is.
Wonderful. Bernie, it's great to have you here today. And Dr. Ely, Bernie is saying nice job as always.
I know Bernie
Just a
very well. Yes, he was great help to me in El Paso County.
wonderful. Thank you, Kathleen, for your comment, and thank you, Jim Schmidt, as well. Deborah S. asks, were passengers killed in the normal course of travel by the Indians? Did Butterfield provide ride-along protection?
So, yes, some sections, and I have this in the book, for instance, I found several instances where the mail company has an armed escort riding out front. And a particular section I remember in the book is coming into Castle Gap Station in Crane County, the Butterfield station there was an armed escort. I don't have any instances of any passengers uh, being killed while riding on the coach. I do have one case that I found from a newspaper account in Young County where Indians chased the coach as it was running in to the next stage stop. But I don't actually have a case where a passenger was killed. But again, employees working at the station, yes, a number of employees lost their lives across the state.
Bob Batson asks, were there branch lines connecting to the main Butterfield line?
Yes, so there were some regional branch lines, and that's really like a spider web. So a lot of regional branch lines, for instance, mail contracts around Texas that were awarded by the Postmaster General. Those branch lines fed into the Butterfield mail line. For instance, at Fort Belknap, again in Young County, there was a branch coming up from Dallas and Fort Worth that connected there. So yes, absolutely, you can find these regional mail contracts that connect to the Overland Mail line, obviously because they want their mail to travel back and forth across the country.
Elaine Mazurek asks, were there instances when the cattle drives interfered with the mail routes?
No, I never found an example of that. The cattle drives really picked up well, late during the 1850s, and then especially during the 1860s and 70s. So there were a number of instances, of course, of Indians attacking the cattle drives, but I never found an instance in newspaper reports or in military correspondence where the cattle drives were interfering with stagecoach operations.
Thank you. Kathleen Bryan is asking the name of the book again. Kathleen, we'll send it out in email as well, but Dr. Ely, if you don't mind repeating the name of the book.
Sure, the Texas Frontier and the Butterfield Overland Mail, 1858 to 1861, and it's published by University of Oklahoma Press, and you can get it on Amazon.
And the author, Kathleen, of course, is Dr. Ely. So, and we'll send this out in the email tomorrow as well. Deborah asks, after the war, were these routes turned into railroad routes, or what became of these mail stations?
Okay, so I guess there's two parts there. There's the road itself, and then what happened to the mail stations, the buildings. Some of the buildings were taken over by private individuals and became homes, just like some of the frontier forts in Texas were later occupied by civilians after the war when these posts were abandoned. A lot of the mail stations today that still survive are on private property. And some of them, of course, the rocks were taken by local ranchers or local residents and incorporated into their buildings. So I know of a number of cases along the route where you can go to not modern, but current ranch buildings and see parts, rock from the old stage stops in the ranch houses today. As to the Butterfield Road, this is a lot that I assume the Park Service is going to be working on when they make the National Historic Trail available to the public. So much of this road and the buildings run through private property today, since most property in Texas is private. That was part of the condition of Texas entering the Union, was Texans could keep their private property. So that was part of the deal too. In researching the book, I had to work with all these landowners to get permission to go on their property to do field research. So there are still quite a few visible ruts available to see throughout Texas. Again, a lot of those are on private property, but some of these you can see on public property. For instance, if you were going to Guadalupe Mountains National Park, you would see the Pinery ruin there. And then in Guadalupe Mountains National Park, you actually can walk sections of the old road, which is really neat. To me, it was very exciting to see that incredible scenery, and then to be walking the old Butterfield Overland route and thinking about all the people who went before you. Again, in the park, there's some historic graffiti etched into the walls of the canyon as you're walking along there, and you can see some of the passengers who left their marks there. So the Park Service will be trying to interpret this as well as possible to make, I'm sure, sections of the road that are available to see today available to the public. And again, the private property, everyone's going to have to respect the landowners on that. But yes, I'll finish up here with this point, that many of the current highways if you had county roads, state highways, and portions of the interstate highway system, these follow over the Butterfield Overland Mail route. So that's still pretty neat to see. Uh, Again, the Park Service, I'm sure, will be showing exactly which parts that people can drive on today to get that experience.
And I would assume that the parts of current highways or state highways or interstate highways that overlap with this route are marked as such. So if one is driving on a highway and there's a section that was the historic Butterfield Overland Trail, that it'll say that, right? So we
Yeah, I hope that we get more signage. That's a great point, Anjali. But the only signage right now, the best signage is, of course, THC signage. And you will, like, for instance, a great marker is on a frontage road outside of Abilene in Tye, Texas, TYE. And if you're on the north side of the interstate, there's a marker from the 1930s that still stands there, and it shows exactly where the Butterfield Road crosses Interstate 20 there. So there are sections on some of the state highways, again, that the THC is marked, and on a few county roads, including unpaved county roads. There are some THC markers there. But again, there's a great need for many more markers, Anjali.
And for those of you that are interested in the markers themselves, you can actually get the detailed text of some of these markers from the THC website, which is at thc.texas.gov. So feel free to explore that as well if you want to, just doing your own research. Kathy, before I ask the question that Kathy has dropped in here, I did want to follow up on Deborah's question about what became of the mail stations. In your research, did you find any mail stations that have been preserved, historically preserved, and are available for people to visit and see?
That's a good question. One of the landowners, uh, I'm just going to say near Abilene because I don't know if I'm authorized to say this. His family has promoted the mail station and had an exhibit on this station at the Grace Museum in Abilene. I believe it was last year, and he had a number of speakers come to the Grace and promote the station, which he and his family did an incredible job reconstructing this to what a mail station might have looked like. Now, he didn't furnish it and he didn't put roofs on it, but you can get an idea of the layout of the station. There's another really good one, but this one is representing a post-Civil War station on a different mail route running from San Antonio to El Paso, but about 10 miles west of Fort Stockton on Interstate 10, near the winery there, is a rest stop. And they reconstructed what a mail station would look like. And in my slideshow here, there was a picture of that. And they took the rocks from the station and built this reconstruction. And again, it gives a really good feel for what the Butterfield stations would have been like as well. So those are reconstructed examples. In many cases, like the Park Service at Guadalupe Mountains, they've left the pinery, the ruins as they are. So you'll see a couple of the walls, but they've stabilized the walls. They're not going to reconstruct it. Other stage stops like Head of Concho, which I showed in there, that's on private property. I think the landowner is going to leave that the way it is. There's a number of, there's some fabulous walls that are still standing, but no one is rebuilding this besides the private landowners from what I've seen. And of course, the highway department using a different mail line east of Fort Stockton.
Thank you. Kathy asks, was there a connection between the Overland Mail route and the frontier forts?
Yes, absolutely. For instance, originally the West Texas route that went from the Pecos River up to Delaware Springs and then across to El Paso, excuse me, over to the Guadalupe Mountains and Waco Tanks, and then on El Paso. We call that the upper route, and that only operated for less than a year. One of the reasons they moved the line south to go through Fort Davis and Fort Quitman was because there was a problem with water availability and also frontier protection. There's no forts on that upper route. So in 1859, they moved the route south to run along the southern route or the lower road. And of course, there they had military protection, especially from Fort Stockton, Fort Davis, and Fort Quitman on to Fort Bliss. So yes, the mail road actually ran through those forts to that. I should also say, excuse me, I stand corrected. They'll kill me if I don't say this. Garland and Lana Richards at Fort Chadbourne, outside of Brant, Texas, south of Abilene, north of San Angelo. They have done an incredible job reconstructing what a Butterfield stage stop would look like. They put a roof on it, doors, everything. So the best place for the public to see what a Butterfield stage stop would look like would be at Fort Chadbourne, again, run by Garland and Lana Richards. I'm glad I remembered that. Oh, man. Anyway, yes. So you'll see at Fort Davis has done a really good job of interpreting the Butterfield period, but their stage stop has not been reconstructed. But you can see where it is in the diagram I have in my book, and also Park Service employees will show you that. Also, Fort Stockton, of course, is a city property there with Comanche Springs, but again, you can see in my book where the fort was. And Fort Quitman, there's nothing left of that, and that's on private property today.
Wonderful, thank you. Bernie also shares that east of Waco Tanks, there's where the trail cuts through the hills, there's a plethora of graffiti dating back to the 1850s. That is the end of the questions in the chat box. I want to open it up to anyone attending. Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask a question if you have any final questions or comments to share.
Can I say one thing? Bernie's point is excellent to follow up on. At Waco Tanks is perhaps the best example of historic graffiti from the early travelers periods, from the 49ers on up to later period in the 1880s and later. So Waco Tanks is not only great for the rock art, but also for the Butterfield and historic graffiti there. It's pretty neat to see.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Bernie. Any final questions from the audience? All right. Well, if not, I wanted to remind you that we will be sending an email out tomorrow with a link to this presentation, the recording, also a link to Dr. Ely's book. In fact, all his books, we'll just list all of them for those of you that are interested. And any other resources, Dr. Ely, Christy will probably reach out and ask if there are any other resources that you'd like us to share. We'd be happy to do that. It seems, based on what you're saying and what you've presented, the full story of the Overland Mail and the history of Texas from that period and around that particular activity of moving mail from one place to another. That whole story is really encapsulated in your research, because there's not very many places that people can actually go and see for themselves other than reading the markers and potentially visiting some exhibits that private landowners might help set up. So for those of you that are interested in this part of Texas history, we would recommend Dr. Ely's book for sure.
I would also say that the National Park Service has a website dedicated to the Butterfield Trail, and they have a list of books in addition to mine on that website. So there's a lot of great resources on the National Park Service website.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll share that in the email as well. Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
I have one quick question. Glenn, Emmett Mills was killed in an ambush by the Apaches. Was that on a Butterfield coach? Do you know?
Yeah, that was in Arizona, I believe, correct?
New Mexico. Actually, it was New Mexico.
New Mexico at what, Dragoon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would have to defer to you on that. My research ends at the state line, Bernie. I'll have to pass the buck to you.
Okay. Yeah. It was one of the times I think there was like 5 passengers. They were ambushed by the
Yes,
Calero Apaches. Yeah.
right.
One
And
of the
there's a
few times they did
marker.
that.
Isn't there a marker in downtown El Paso to Emmett?
There's one to Emmett and his brothers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. WW and Anson. You bet. Thanks, Glenn. Appreciate it. Good work
Thank
as
you,
always.
Bernie.
You're welcome.
Angelica, thank you so much. I didn't realize you were on as well. Thank you for sharing the link. And we will include this in our email tomorrow. Thank you. Much appreciated. Do you have anything to share, Angelica, about the National Park Service's work on this? I'm putting you on the spot, but if you wouldn't mind coming off mute for a second.
Yes, can you see me?
Yes,
Okay. Yeah, so we've completed a round of public scoping meetings that started last fall and we finished in April, where we've done lots and lots of tribal outreach and government to government consultation across the country. And then starting again this fall and winter, we will be coming back to all of these communities along Butterfield and doing some designated alignment, ground truthing, looking at trail segments, historic sites, and also partnership outreach meetings. So
thank you.
yeah, and we're basically in the process of our comprehensive plan, planning process, which will be completed probably in about 1.5 years completely. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'll look for more information as the Park Service goes through its process. Appreciate you sharing that. I have the website open on my screen.
Great.
We'll make sure that we include that link in the email as well.
All
Thank
right.
you, Angelica.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Okay, Bernie just added a comment. He stands corrected. The ambush was just across the border in Arizona territory. So, all right. Well, thank you all. We really, really appreciate you joining us. Dr. Ely, thank you so much for this fascinating story and history. I'm sure many of us are going to go hunting online and we'll be looking at your book as well. And really appreciate you sharing your research with us.
Thank you, Angelique.
And thank you all for joining us. As a reminder, we have another event coming up in October focused on the railroad, which is not tied to Dr. Ely's presentation, but kind of in the same vein, talking about transportation, talking about, movement of people and goods back in early days of Texas. So we hope you'll join us for that event as well. Again, registration is open for that on our website, thcfriends.org. And with that, I'll say thank you all to everyone and a very good night to you, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.